I would like to call our friend Oyebesi to the stage, who will moderate this session. And please also allow me to invite Harjit, Patricia, Chinelo, and Zia, who will be our panelists for today. Thank you, and over to you, Oyebesi.
My panelists start to find their seats. Let's use that to warm up this morning. And maybe what I should tell you about my panelists is that one of them likes to play PlayStation. There's another that is a Man U fan. One is a mathematician, and another is an organic farmer. Exciting, isn't it? As debt levels reach unsustainable levels across the global south, and there's a need for us to reform the global financial architecture, our session today around financing for development in crisis, death, and the future of aid will help us to gather some insight, some wisdom, and also some foresight on how best to address this very important topic. And I'm sure you're excited as I am to be able to listen to the very distinguished panelists that I have this morning. Also, this is gender balanced, isn't it? A round of applause for Corporation Canada for doing that. So, having introduced you to my panelists based on the things that they do, let me also tell you their organizational affiliations. I have Patricia Miranda from Latin Dad, and I also do have Zia Rehman from Asia Development Alliance. I have Ajit Singh from CETAT Sempada Climate Foundation, and I have Chinelo Hagom Heze, Canadian Food Grains Bank. By the end of this session, I'll tell you whom amongst them is a fan of Man U, who is the mathematician, who is the organic farmer, and who enjoys playing PlayStation. But while at that, let me hand over to Patricia, who would share her thoughts with us on death and financial architecture. What do you have for us?
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in this panel with my colleagues. Well, a global financial architecture, to be truly fair and effective, it needs to have a reform, not just slight changes, makeup changes. It needs to have a systemic reform. And that is a transformation of the governance of the international financial architecture. This panel is about financing for development. The next conference, the fourth conference on financing for development, will take place in the end of June in Sevilla. And one of the most important outcomes that we would expect from this FFD4, as it's called and usually known, one of the most important outcomes that we are expecting for is the strengthening the multilateralism. And I have to say, multilateralism is at stake. So it would be really crucial that this is strengthened after this FFD conference. And what does this mean? It means to have a new financial architecture in a democratic space where all countries are sitting at the same table, discussing and making together jointly decisions about norm setting, about new rules on financial architecture, which currently is in few hands, mainly in the hands of the international financial institutions, such as the Bretton Woods institutions, for instance, where the IMF, the World Bank have an important role. But we also know that these are not democratic spaces. The decisions are based mainly on the quota power that each country has. So that leaves usually most of the southern countries aside or excluded for being really part of these decisions. The last FFD conference, it's FFD3, was held in 2015 in Addis Abeba. And one of the main demands from civil society organizations and from southern countries was UN Convention on Tax Cooperation, on International Tax Cooperation, known as the UN Tax Body. After FFD3, it took really several years, but finally now there is an ongoing process about a convention, a UN convention on taxation. So now the next key topic in the agenda, in the global economic agenda, and the next challenge is debt. Debt is an issue that has not been resolved in many years, and their impact has been more evident after the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is an urgent issue that needs to be solved. So this will be, this year, a key topic in the financing for development arena. There are 60 countries that are in moderate to high risk of debt and sustainability. In low-income countries and middle-income countries, around 35% of their tax incomes are spent to repay debt service. And prioritizing this debt service payment, of course, undermines the essential needs in investment in needs such as education, health, and social protection. So the proposal here, and to go straight to the question, is we need a debt architecture reform. We need new rules on debt through a UN Convention framework on debt. And this is to tackle the whole debt cycle, not only the debt restructuring, a debt restructuring process, but also to allow a debt crisis prevention, which is something that is well proven that the world doesn't have so far. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Patricia. And I'll move to Zia. Zia, what would be your hot take on the end of aid?
For inviting me for this wonderful conversation. Aid cut is not new. When in 1995, I started working in this sector, we had quite flexible and open aid processes. And I know that we were actually suggesting our own developmental interventions, whatever we wanted to implement through the community-led processes, and we were being supported. And I know that one of the wonderful organization, NoWeb, they funded us for 15 years on our terms and conditions. But you know what happened? Gradually, we have seen this tidying up of aid with the processes of RFP, request for proposals, where they were actually now sharing with us that this is the concept note and you have to follow and you have to apply for that. So it's a systemic, actually, challenge that the aid process has faced, and we know that this is happening since long. And this Trump virus on aid is just very, very new. But the rights activists like myself has been questioning about the aid cuts since long. The OECD DAC has released the figures that out of 24 billion US dollars, only $2 billion US dollars reached down to the local civil society organizations. Means that 90% of the total aid that is being channeled through the organizations based in the aid providing countries. So the biggest challenge that we have been facing is that the local civil societies are not being strengthened in this process. The second is that the rights-based organizations, the rights-based agendas are being eliminated gradually. So this is something that I think we need to look at. Yes, this aid cut has damaged a lot, and a lot to the services, to the humanitarian actions. But unfortunately, what is happening nowadays is that mostly the media is highlighting that this aid cut process has stopped working, work related to the humanitarian aid. But no one is talking about democracy, the challenge that the democracy, the human rights, the civic rights and spaces are have been facing because of these aid cuts. So this actually paradigm shift from rights-based agenda to the aid that is supporting humanitarian actions, this actually need to be changed a little bit. The second thing that I would actually try to highlight over here is that this is not only the aid and the support. This is actually the reparations. You know, we need to think on that. This shifting of power, we need to think on that. This is really, really important. And the new framework that we are emphasizing for the support and aid is reparation. This is important. What we have been doing is that emphasizing that yes, the aid is being supported, is being provided, but not emphasizing on justice, not emphasizing on the historical responsibility, which is important. So that should also be considered. The third thing that I would highlight today is that the direct support to the local civil society organizations, which is very, very important. I have already said on that, but the aid channelization should be directly to the local civil society organizations. This would have been much better situation today if we had supported the local civil society organizations in the past. Now, the work has been stopped in many of the countries. 67% of the civil societies in the global south have been facing challenge after this aid cut, which is a huge, huge number. And if that would have been through the local civil society organizations in the past, it would have been much, much better situation. Finally, I think we should also try to focus on diverse aid options. The civil society organizations should also focus on social entrepreneurial kind of work. The regulatory framework that we have been facing today in our countries, not only in the global south, but also in the global north, requires us to change the paradigm of the NGO. It should be a social entrepreneurial kind of work where we actually try to engage ourselves with the private sector, with the corporates, directly with the people, mass funding, crowdfunding kind of things. So these may be some of the options where we can actually try to figure out how we can be more resilient in this time of difficulty.
Yes, thank you so much, Sia. And let me come to you, Chinelo. What implication does all of this have for humanitarian action?
Thank you, Yebisi. So I'm going to situate my remarks kind of really within the context that we're all very familiar with at the moment, which is shrinking aid and the overlapping global crises. and it's really, my comments are going to kind of focus mainly on what we as civil society can do in, I guess, helping to address, like, facilitate our humanitarian action. My comments won't necessarily speak to financing, but would provide strategies, strategies that we could use to bolster what is already existing from government funding. And so I'll start off by saying I have 4 points. So the first one is, if there's anything the changing climes have shown us, is that there isn't a very good understanding of what we do. Generally, by the public and even by the politicians and the decision makers we speak to daily, there isn't a very good understanding of our impact. And maybe that's where we've gotten it wrong. Maybe we've not done well in communicating our impact. And so maybe what we need to be doing in terms of reframing and repositioning as we speak to decision makers is to be able to communicate what's our long-term impact. Most times after a project, we submit our reports to GAC. It's read by a number of people in GAC. We do a learning event and speak to ourselves, but we don't necessarily communicate to the public that this is what this funding has done. This is the good that it has done. I would even take it a step further to say, for some projects, do we do a long-term impact assessment? So if we did a project in any of the places we've worked, do we go back there 5 years, 10 years, and say, what has the change been? How do we tell those stories? We're constantly being, when we go to decision makers, we're telling them, yes, it's working, but we need more. But we do not communicate effectively the impact that we're making. And I think that's the first place we need to make a change. But beyond that, we not only need to be talking about our impact, we need to be talking about our accountability. How are we accountable for the funds that we use? These are conversations that have been coming up, especially in these times when aid is being questioned. We are hearing narratives around the wastefulness of aid. So maybe part of our messaging should also be addressing accountability. How are we accountable? Showing the people that we do have processes in place. We also need to be communicating our bold, data-driven ideas, and also tracking that change that happens that hopefully leads to self-sufficiency for some people that we serve. So I think that's the first point I'll make. The second one is around compelling messaging, and compelling messaging that counteracts the politicization of aid. In the humanitarian sector, we live and work by humanitarian principles. Being able to craft compelling messages that basically goes to support and drive and entrench those humanitarian principles as a means of counteracting the politicization of aid. The second point I'll make is around active engagement of key decision makers. And that's not to say that we're not doing that already. But this is to say that if, for instance, there is a party in power, being able to speak to the opposition parties, being able to build support amongst people who may not necessarily agree with you, and build consensus around the ideas that you believe in. In the last 2 years, when in Canada we've been going back and forth about whether we have an election coming, we don't have an election coming. We've been viewing the polls like Sue says and saying what's gonna happen, reading the tea leaves. Some of us had started kind of having conversations, more concerted, targeted conversations with the opposition. And some of the messaging that we used, I'll just talk about one of them, was really around the 3Ds and a T, which is basically making the argument that good and effective foreign policy is made up of diplomacy, defense, development, and trade. And failing to not capture development is to do a great disservice to your foreign policy. And it seems like, I don't know, but we'll see, whether it seems that message to some extent has resonated. And so being able to craft messaging, I think some of us had already made some of these remarks yesterday when we were talking, I think it was Kim who was talking about speaking to them about what matters to them. And so being able to craft messaging around that is really useful. And then the last point I'll make is around being able to take specific, tangible, and actionable items to government. Sometimes when we make proposals or we make suggestions, we're like, invest more. We come up with very broad, grand statements, but we don't give them tangible action items that they can use to actually implement what we want. And so if we are able to craft, again, and suggest tangible, specific, actionable items, we can not only move our own agenda forward, but also help in shaping government policy, because they may believe in the things we believe in, but they may not know how to do it. And that's where we come in. One example I'll give is really, I spend a lot of my time working around the nexus issue, whether it's humanitarian development nexus or the humanitarian development peace triple nexus. And these are conversations we've been having with the government of Canada, successfully or unsuccessfully, that remains to be seen. But in these times of shrinking aid and in these changing times, the conversation that's now being had is not just about, oh, we need to have Nexus implemented, but basically making the point that implementing Nexus is about efficiency. So it's not about saving, it's not about cost saving, it's about the efficiency of $8 and stretching it as far as it can possibly go, and maximizing impact as we do it. So we're meeting them in that proposal, we're meeting them where they're at. We're meeting them in the conversation around how can we make aid efficient and effective, and we're proposing a way forward. I'll pause here and hand back to you.
Okay, Chinelo, even though you decided not to talk about finance, Ajit will. So Ajit, climate justice finance, what hope?
I'm thinking of skipping the topic altogether. Anyway, I think it's really important for us to champion systematic reform than just looking at the symptomatic management that we have been doing for a very long time. And let that sink in. We have not really done enough structural analysis. Even if it's there, it has not been embraced by civil society across the board. And the time has come to target the very architecture, as we heard, whether we talk about the debt crisis, whether we talk about the rising inequality or climate crisis or biodiversity crisis. The core cause remains the same. It's the financial architecture, it's the oligarchy, which is now so blatant right in our face. Unless we target those structural causes head on, we will not be able to deal with it. We will only be doing symptom management, and that's not going to be enough. And that is why it is important to talk about changing the frame, which has to move from dealing with these issues one by one or in a very siloed approach to bringing climate reparations framing right at the very core, as we also heard from Zia. And particularly in the global north. Global south has been talking about it for a very long time, so this is not a new framing. But in global north, we have not heard civil society actually picking it up. In fact, the term climate justice only became popular only in the last 4 or 5 years, thanks to young people who were holding those placards. And it took time to really move from holding that placard to actually understanding and internalizing that it's all about equity, fairness, and justice, which needs to be delivered in the form of finance, which we now need in trillions annually and not billions. Unless that is delivered, we will not be able to deal with multiple crises that we are facing. And when we talk about that scale of climate finance or finance for debt cancellation or biodiversity, managing the biodiversity crisis, what we heard from Global North leaders that they don't have the mandate, and if they do it, the ordinary people are actually going to resist. The fact is, how much we have actually communicated to the ordinary people about that historical injustice, that's the fundamental question. Have we done enough education in the Global North to talk about that historical injustice and the responsibility Global North has? Since you have not done it, of course, ordinary people are not going to be able to understand why my government is giving away money or doing charity and aid when they are also suffering, because the reality is that people in the Global North are also suffering. We heard this phrase when energy crisis was at its peak, that even people in the Global North have to choose between eating and heating. So they're also facing that reality, and the core cause remains the same. It's that structure which has caused the problem. So I think it's time for us to embrace that narrative of reparations and talk about historical injustice, communicate with ordinary people about those causes and why Global North is responsible, move away from the framing of aid. Of course, in our common language we use it, but the fact is it is about delivering justice, and that has to be used in our public advocacy and narrative, and also when we talk to policymakers. Unless that happens, we will not be able to deal with the crisis. All the millions and couple of billions are not going to really help, especially when we are living in a 1.6 degrees warmer world and we are seeing impacts all around us. So I'm just going to agree with everything that has been said, that we need an integrated narrative, and our analysis has to be sharp and deep enough so that we are able to deal with it through the systemic change that is required.
Thank you so much, Ajit. I would come to the audience very shortly, and the question that would define the conversations we'd have in an open panel would be, what must civil society do to adjust in its approach on these different issues? Also, what collective messages should the C7 convey to the G7 and other key international fora? Please keep thinking about these questions, but let me take a round of one or two more from my panelists, and I'll quickly come back to you in the audience for more thoughts and insights as well, including questions that you may have for my panelists. For all that you've heard so far, any reactions, any ideas that you want to expound again? Let me start with Patricia for 1 minute.
Yes, thank you. Well, it's definitely not only about solidarity. It is about reparations. It is about justice. And if we talk about that, whenever I see in the news in Latin America and in the Global South that we have a new loan for climate adaptation, or we have a new loan for reducing extreme poverty, that is not fair. And it's not fair, and it's more evident in this current context, which we are in a multiple crisis, when we have the cost of capital has increased. So middle-income countries, but also low-income countries, have less access to concessional financing. There are no rules about how responsibility is from both sides, from the borrower and from the lender, and there isn't these rules in place. So it's usually a creditor-centered approach where no matter what, the debt service payment to the creditor needs to be guaranteed. If this has to happen undermining education, food security, health, well, it will have to happen that way, but we cannot afford to stop paying our debt and in a context of crisis. So that is the kind of issues that we need to be more aware in terms of, it's not just a number in terms of a ratio in the case of debt, but we're talking about lives, we're talking about numbers of children, of women that don't have access to fair public services. So we need to also see the human face when we talk about the need of reforming the financial architecture. And the current tools in place, and I would like to very briefly elaborate a little bit more on what I was talking about when I say a UN Convention framework on sovereign debt. It's, you can say, well, what is that? And in the FFV current document, which is under elaboration, you can see several proposals around debt, around the transparency, around reforming the criteria. What is sustainable debt or what is not? What are the responsibilities? Do we need national legislations in creditor countries or in borrower countries? All these issues are part of what it could be this convention framework. So whether it's put in different paragraphs, in different ways, most of the topics around reforming the debt architecture that could be part of this convention framework are in the document. But it's important also to address that this convention framework, it's not about these policies. You know, the debt architecture is like a puzzle, you can imagine, and it has several pieces. So those pieces are being discussed already. But to have a UN Convention framework is more than just policies. It's about governance. It's about who makes the decisions then to follow on policies. So that is the difference, and that is our main call in terms of an inclusive and fair governance. Thank you.
Sia.
So one dimension in this aid cuts and ODA is that ODA is being also used as OSA, Official Security Assistance. And we see that in many of your, countries, you have just introduced this term, and I know that Japan and even Canada and the others, they have announced this. So I think this trend need to be discussed in the civil society. Some of the ODA is also being channeled through the military aid in the global south, which is again a very challenging trend, and we need to discuss and discourage this trend also. The other thing is that who is actually deciding all that? Do we really have a role in the decision making, as Patricia has said? Yes, ODA is there. The funding is being channelized through the organizations that are based in the global north. 90% of the fund is being used there. Only, less than 2% is reaching out to the global south. So who is actually making decisions on all that? So we need actually a space for decision making where we should actually sit together and decide about what could be the better options of all these instruments. And the third thing is that, again, I would highlight specifically the rights-based organizations, the feminist organizations, youth-led organizations, the organizations which are working on the democracy and human rights. They are really, really suffering, and we need to emphasize support for those organizations. The funding, whatever is available, should be channeled for those civil society organizations. That would be helpful. The more, the strong global south in democracy and human rights and civic rights and spaces, the more would be better situation in the global north. Otherwise, the challenges of immigration that I'm hearing today, every now and then in many of the global northern countries, that would escalate and the situation would be like, it's not a threat, but it's actually, what is happening. We are very, very much connected with each other. And this is our responsibility to take care of, each other. So to me, I think this is important to engage and to involve in decision-making processes to all of us, yeah.
Chinelo.
I'll just respond to some of the points that were made by Patricia and Harjeet. I think the US, as we all know, the USAID cuts were a shock to the system. But then, while it was a shock, in a weird way, it also provides opportunities and prospects. Over the years, we've been hearing from governments about how we need to leverage private sector, but we don't quite know the how. Like, there's a lot of conversation and rhetoric around we need to diversify pots of funding, we need to rethink how ODA is done. But maybe there is a space where civil society can actually take a lead in this conversation, as opposed to like almost waiting for governments to kind of show us the direction when they talk about it. But to actually be able to meet these actors, whether it's the private sector, whether it's looking at, and please, the finance people in the room, please correct me, I'm not a finance person, concessional funding, diaspora remittances, like leveraging diaspora remittances for development. What proposals can we make as civil society to say this is the best way these these tools can be utilized to serve our purposes, but also to kind of address the conversation around diversifying the ODA pots. I don't know how this helps our humanitarian programming, just in view of the fact that we are guided by humanitarian principles. But in terms of development, there are opportunities there. And I think it also falls on us so that we're not dictated to. We're able to also shape that narrative and shape the conversation. And I know a number of organizations in the room, such as One, do work on this. But it's really to kind of figure out how can we leverage the opportunity that has been given to us that we didn't necessarily ask for, but have been given. And I think to the climate point, at COP28, there was a declaration on climate relief, recovery, and peace. This was a declaration, doesn't necessarily have meat to it or any enforceable bits. But what it showed is that there was an acknowledgement that there is an interconnectedness between all these pieces. And as civil society organizations who are working in this space and who see the interconnected nature between climate and its impact on humanitarian crises around the world, and the impact of conflict in destabilizing societies and disturbing the peace, if you can go so far as to say that, what we could do is actually show through our programming that it's possible for us to address all these pieces together. And yes, it's being done, but maybe there's a way to scale it up. Maybe there is a way that we can approach our programming, as Harjeet had said, not in a siloed way, but really looking at it from the lens that it is all interconnected.
Thank you so much, Chinelo. Ajit.
Let me build on what has already been said. I think it's very clear that we have a very clear-cut role, which is now building broader, deeper, and more diverse coalitions. And thanks to Cooperation Canada, I think this conversation itself is an example that how we are able to go beyond our silos, and we are trying to look at the issues in a far more interconnected manner, whether it's the aid issue or debt or even trade and climate justice and tax justice and so on. So clearly, on one hand, we need more North-South collaboration, but we also need a lot more South-South cooperation. And there are some examples, they may not be perfect ones. Recently, I was in Shanghai, where there was a conversation between European Union and China to see how China can play a bigger role now because of what's happening in the US. But I also had the opportunity to visit what we say New Development Bank or the BRICS Bank. And I was quite impressed with many of the things that they are doing. As I said, it may not be perfect, but they talk about no veto power. They also have a policy of no conditionalities. They only look at the project, by its own design and its own the value it offers. And they are also trying to, not really saying it, but moving towards de-dollarization, where they are trading in and local currencies. I think some of those examples need to come forward, and that's where we need to talk about, and I agree with Chinello. I think there are also a number of opportunities. While there's a lot of doom and gloom, we are going to see many new alliances and many new formulations. Between governments, we're already seeing, but I think within civil society, we should also talk about that. As coming from climate justice work a lot more, we are also realizing that our engagement with the industrial policy needs to be far more than what it has been so far, because that's at the very heart of the kind of development we are seeing, because we are moving from that fossil fuel extraction-based development to now so-called green colonialism. And we need to be very mindful of that. So how do we engage with many more such areas? So the trade work, industrial policy work is going to be far more important.
Yes, thank you so much, Ajit. A couple of buzzwords that I've been able to take away from the 2 rounds of conversation so far: reparation, justice, sustainable death, increased cost of capital, reform the financial architecture, official development assistance, or official security assistance, and in my own words, official defense assistance. We need a space for decision making. There's a need for us to have support for rights-based organizations. Of course, we do have opportunities and prospects in all of this chaos. Civil society leadership on alternative or funding diversification within ODA. We need to scale up. And of course, the conversation around North-South cooperation or South-South cooperation as well. Now, turning to you, my distinguished audience, what should civil society do differently? What opportunities are there? So I'll take the first 3 rounds of questions, and let me start. Okay, the mics are going around. Let me start with the gentleman to my right. I'll try to balance this, the gentle lady in the middle here, and then the other gentle lady there. Yeah, please.
Yeah, just to say that I think what Harjeet and Zia are also saying, that we should not lose this focus, because yesterday somebody talked about our histories as well as movements as people, and to recognize that in a certain sense, what the South has been saying and what a global partnership has been saying is not starting now. Zia talked about Oxfam Novib, which started this conversation 30 years ago, kind of thing. Around that time, there was a sense that's why you had the emergence of the Third World Network, the South Center in Geneva. You had the focus on the Global South, which works across Africa, Latin America, Asia. You had the World Social Forum. You had different initiatives that came up with this kind of paradigm of looking at solidarity and what it means, of walking together and what it means 30 years ago. The question is, we have lost that discourse. And we should not start this discourse as if this is a new idea that we are starting now. It's a clamor from the South for a long time. There were partners that moved along with this in the North as well, but it needs to be reinstated. And for us, I think in terms of today's meeting and yesterday's meeting, in a certain sense, this year is critical because this C7 is the first meeting of many global meetings that will happen in the year. So how we string this idea in all the other processes that are going to happen this year will be critical in seeing how we continue with this idea that surfaced around 30, 35, 25 years ago, kind of thing. I think it's important to get it right, lest we lose an opportunity of what we understand needs to be done.
Thank you very much. Let's not lose our history. The gentle lady in the middle.
First, thank you to the organizers. This has been an incredible 2 days, and thank you to you. I'm going to start off with a little bit of a Canadian joke and then get really serious. As a cis, heterosexual, white female, I'm sorry. Okay, you know, it's really, this is, you know, I've lived here my whole life. I want my country to do better, and I search and search and search for what is happening. And I've spent the last 15 years fighting for a carbon tax with rebate here in Canada, and $1 million was spent just on the Meta platforms to lie to Canadians, and perhaps that's why you're getting your last rebate on Earth Day. So I'm wondering, in this space, so we know from other studies that a lot of climate disinformation has happened in our country and is happening all over the world on social media. So I'm wondering if there's any studies or any strategies in this space, which is so important. I mean, my husband's family moved from India to Canada. They could have gone to the United States and made a fortune. Came here because we are a Christian country that does our best to be Christian. Like, you know, I mean that not, like, we don't normally talk about religion, and that's why I'm shaking, because it's not Canadian to do that. But his parents, who are Hindu, moved here because we tended to walk our values, and it disturbs me to no end to know, we know all this, and I just want to say, again, I'm sorry, but I'm not gonna blame myself. I'm gonna say there's players out here, out on social media, out there that are working really hard against us. I wonder if there's any information on the disinformation within this space, as there is for climate action or Indigenous action, to, you know, help us combat this, because this is really important, and we can take care of each other. There's abundance.
Yes, we can take care of each other. There's abundance. The gentle lady, thank you.
Thank you. I was really excited by what Chinello and Harjeet were talking about in terms of the opportunity right now. We have a US government that's taking a hammer to the international financial system, and it's really a question what's going to emerge. We know where it's going to try to emerge, certainly, in terms of even crystallizing this economic system that's about infinite growth for companies, which is the ideology of a cancer cell. But we haven't had an opportunity like this since Occupy Wall Street in terms of fundamental economic structural reforms. And I'm curious what you think. To me, the one that seems to, I haven't followed the impact of it, but this idea of a triple bottom line of accountability for companies, we can't unlock private sector financing because simply they're doing their jobs. They're only accountable for increasing profit. So anything in terms of it's a donation, it's philanthropy, it's a nice to have, it's not fundamental. Whereas this ESG agenda, where a company's accountable not just for profit, but for governance, human rights, and sustaining the environment, which builds it into their DNA as a fundamental purpose of the company itself. I know Europe's made some progress on that, but I'm curious your views on how you see, it seems to me this is a moment to crystallize around some of these, offer an alternative vision of how we could rebuild the the shattered system in a better way. But again, with Occupy Wall Street, we never crystallized around a compelling story and message, like it never will trickle down, it never trickles down, that, you know, opens the door to build something better. So I'm just curious what you think of that one and how we can really use this opportunity now.
Okay, great. Let me take another round of 3 questions. I hope you're taking notes. Okay, good. Okay, okay, this side of the divide is not, okay, let me go to the back, the gentle lady at the back there.
Hi. So this is a topic that's been on my mind for a while, but so overseas development assistance and human rights are not a nice fit always. And we know this. The rationale for development assistance is based on wealth. But what countries do with that wealth doesn't mean that they're protecting human rights or following the principles of SDGs. So my concern, and I'm speaking here, experiencing this firsthand as Canada has developed a funding stream, particularly to address a set of global human rights issues that I work on directly. but they've attached it to ODA. So that's problematic because there are a number of countries that don't qualify for ODA assistance that are huge human rights violators, that criminalize whole groups of people. And we can't bring them under the envelope of that funding. So how do we, I'm not saying there's going to be an answer in this room today, but how can we start having a better conversation about aligning development assistance with development and human rights, and not just the wealth of a country, no matter what they're doing with their wealth?
Yeah, maybe there's going to be an answer from this side, though. So I'll take, yes, please. Please come. Macro? Please let me give it to him. Yeah. Then I'll come. I'll be sure to take all the hands.
Thank you. Just to show an appreciation for a word that you've used, that is reparation. Showing that the words we are using are all related to the dimension of relation. Let's think about debit and debt and credit. They come from Latin. Debt means, comes from the verb debere. In Spanish it's quite clear, even in French and Italian, but means to owe something. And to owe something means to owe something to you. I have a duty towards someone, towards you. And credit is credere. Credere means believe. That means that if I give you money, I believe in you. So there is the idea of trust. And trust and duty are a relation, but a lot of other words we use in politics, like decent work, like human rights. We are speaking about human right holders and duty bearers. Right is a relation, because you can't have right without duties, of course. Even decent or dignified, we speak about dignified life. Dignified means, comes from dignus, and dignus means, how can I say, adequate in the environment. So even when we are speaking about absolute values, we are using words that are connected to the dimension, or that contains the dimension of relation. And in that sense, I think that it's interesting to use the perspective of restorative justice, of transitional justice. That is the experience of South Africa, but also of a lot of other countries, that sees the idea of justice not based on the distribution, or on the retribution, that is the justice of the market, but on the fact that the relation we build are relation that takes care of the dignity, that again is a relation, the quality of the other person. And the experience of South Africa says that if we have injustice, that is killing, breaking the relation, to have justice, we have to build again the relation, to come back to speak together. That's the foundation of the Justice and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So I think that we have to look at the debt, but also at all our relations in that perspective. So shifting of power, that Zia was saying, is not that now I am the master, but is that the current balance of power is killing our relations, and we have to build again our relation. I think that that perspective is interesting and can found even philosophically our care for South-South cooperation, North-South cooperation, and our duty, speaking with the media, speaking with the politicians about the narrative that you were mentioning before, is also to show what is the point of view and the condition of the South, of the creative people, to change this relation in a perspective of humanizing relation. And I think that this is absolutely possible, and this is the issue and the challenge that we have for Sevilla. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Quick temperature check. Let me see how many more comments. 1, 2. Gone. So I'll take this last 3 rounds, then I'll come back to my panelists.
So I'll circle back to what my colleague said about the first thing that I learned when I started working in international development was the diplomacy, development, and defense work hand in hand. And lately, especially our brother country, whatever brother or sister you want to call it, the negative narrative that is developing around the financing in international cooperation, the development cooperation, international cooperation, has been quite a challenge. That too, in a time where the resources are getting shorter and shorter every single day. So the public narrative building around the need for international cooperation or for the financing of international cooperation also is very important, and being civil society, maybe it is on us to actually take care of that. The public narrative saying, apologies for the response, but I heard in the Foreign Affairs Committee of the US that so many millions sent for condoms in Syria. What was the use of this? Rather than actually building and changing narratives around, maybe $1 per household in Canada can save 23 million lives that will be affected by AIDS, TB, and malaria through supporting Global Fund. So the aid or the international cooperation is not thought of as politically mobilized funds or wasteful. Rather, we change the narrative. And like you actually mentioned, what can civil society do? Maybe we are there in the communities. We are the builders of this narrative. So we really need to mobilize and start changing the public narratives, and creating a new narrative for development cooperation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Just please, the gentle lady in the middle here.
Thank you. And this is a bit of a question or comment for the floor, but also to our lovely panelists in their kind of experience in global advocacy and interacting in kind of the C7 spaces. I'm interested, in Canada, our fair share, there's been a lot of great research done to calculate Canada's fair share to Canada's contributions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that are going to keep us within the 1.5 limit. The research has been really great, but communicating it is a public relations nightmare because we are responsible for reducing 160%. 80% of that is for our domestic emissions, and the other 80% is what we are supposed to make up in climate finance just for mitigation. And that calculation is $25 billion a year, is where we are supposed to be committing right now as a country. And so being able to communicate that, even civil society, we've walked away from it because we don't know how to communicate that to the Canadian public, especially in this time of like an affordability crisis that we're facing here, and being able to make that connection. So what I am interested though is in how we are making the connections between debt cancellation, between tax justice, between all of these things that we can package together as contributions towards that amount. Not to say that Canada needs to show up with dollars as well, and so do other G7 countries, but I am interested in how we are bringing that together, and I think the communique talks about all of those things in a way and is platformed to kind of help us communicate like a series of things that we can be doing. And I'm interested to know what other G7 countries that are here, or if people are hearing on how other countries are talking about their fair share and being able to communicate it.
Thank you so much.
Good morning. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate this. I just want to call attention to the T that Chinelo mentioned, which is the matter of trade. I firmly believe that this is a matter of economic justice. It's one of the areas that we talk about in the communique. But without civil society taking forward the issue of the terms of trade that discourage manufacturing in the global south, we will not see economic justice. And now we see the most prosperous nation, one of the most prosperous nations on earth, suggesting that the terms of trade are against them. When we have a global economic system that discourages countries from leveraging the advantages of having primary resources that are needed for technological manufacturing. It discourages them from actually hosting manufacturing in their countries because they would not be able to export them at a commercially viable rate. And so I think as civil society, this is not an issue that we should just see as peripheral to what we do, but it is central to economic justice.
Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to put all my panelists under pressure. You've heard it all in 1 minute each.
No, that's not.
Please respond.
That's not a fair share.
And I'm allowed to shrink your civic space.
Time.
All right, so let's see what we can do in 1 minute each. I've been told I've got 10 minutes more. So let's see what we can do with that. Yep. Thank you. I'll start with Chidelo.
I don't know if I can do 1 minute, but quickly. We've said a lot in the room, and I think, and we've said a lot around what we can do as civil society, and that's kind of where I want to anchor my final comments. There was something you said about the onus being on us to act and to change how things are spoken about. I think as civil society, we need to do two things in this time. The first is adapt. We need to adapt to the way we talk about what we do. We speak to ourselves in the language we understand. We talk about inclusiveness, resilience, gender transformative. The truth of the matter is that the public doesn't understand what we're talking about. We're well versed in our speak, but they're not versed in our speak. And so how can we communicate what we do, who we serve, how we achieve it? How can we really distill that for the public to understand? And that's a challenge to us. And to your point about how to communicate the fair share, there are companies out there who do public relations. If we come together as a coalition and say, we want to be able to communicate this beautiful research that is all technical and all to the public, how can we distill it? And I found that they're very, very useful. Like they can make what we do sound like gold. Some of it is we're trying to use that in pivoting our messaging in Canada here to be able to appeal to other people, to the public at large. So being able to make that case and adapt. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that as the UN, in the UN, we talk, as the UN has spoken about a new way of working. As civil society, we also need to be talking about a new way of working. We need a reset. We need to be looking at how can we do the things we do better and how can we communicate it better? How can we reposition ourselves to be more responsive to the situations that we face? And whether that is in terms of the localization argument or in terms of nexus, but really how can we adapt how we work to be more business conscious? I think that's the best way to put it. How can we be more responsive to the times and to governments as well?
Zia.
So thank you. I think I can't agree more with William when he was saying that this has been the lost discourse. And I think this is the good opportunity for all the civil society across the globe, which are actually having the opportunities to meet each other and to continue with discourse on how we actually make ourselves powerful. And I do not agree with this South-South cooperation. I think that there is a more need of a South and North cooperation among the civil society, because the societies in the North are also facing the similar challenges that we have been facing today. The democracy is at risk, even in the North. And the civic spaces, the human rights, the populist governments, everything that we have been actually struggling with, the North is also struggling with the same. So more of a need of North and South cooperation among the civil societies. And I would also like to respond the question of a lady over there when she was saying that Canada decided to contribute for the human rights, and the human rights, the countries were not qualifying for the human rights. This is the systemic challenge, actually. This is what we are actually fighting for. had we been having qualification for the human rights, why should we have been, in need of any kind of aid? So this is the challenge. The aid is channeled through, the ODA is channeled through the governments. ODA is channeled through the IFIs and PDBs, which are having, challenging financial architecture. So this is the challenge, and this is why we are actually talking about the systemic changes. And on this issue of reparations, there is a conversation going on, and I think we need to build on that. And both Patricia and Harjeet they are more qualified for this. But it's development debt that we have been actually carrying on our shoulder. But there is a climate reparation that we call climate debt. So why not swap climate debt with the development debt and see, how it happens and how we actually create a kind of world which is quite based on equity and and based on economic justice. So this is important. And my last message is that we should actually try to push our leaders to stand with the billions and not with the billionaires.
Patricia.
Thank you. Well, I would like to take from what Sia said, and it is also important to address debt and human rights. You can say, what is the relation? But there is even the office of an expert in the UN that analyzes the impact on foreign debt over human rights, over women's rights, indigenous people's rights. So there is a strong link, and I encourage all of us to bring it up more often. Someone asked about how to link all these debt attacks with the realities that we are also talking about. And as CSOs, it's important, as we say, to be inside and outside. I mean, to be outside doing demonstrations, calling very loud with our demands. If it's not CSOs, who will strongly put every day the urgency need in this context? But also to be inside, to be like the space that we will have this afternoon to speak directly with the Sherpa, with global decision makers. It's not that we're going to change their minds in 5 minutes, we know that, but it's the opportunity to have a discussion, to be directly listened, not only about our concerns, but our proposals. So it's important for CSOs to keep doing alliances and being in all sites as possible. And how to link it? We have listened for a long time now that there isn't money. I'm sorry if you have needs for climate financing, if we have needs, resources needs for accomplishing the SDGs, but there is no money in the world. But there is. And we know there is money there. There is so many billions of dollars that are going to be aimed for war, for instance, for military expenditures. So there is money, but we also need to think beyond and demand decision makers to be more creative, to have more innovative sources of funds. And one of them, for instance, is a no-debt creating source of financing, which is the special drawing rights. And this is a very big topic, but to say it in few words, it's like creating money out of nothing, that it's not debt, that it doesn't need to be repaid. It has an interest rate, not for all countries. It depends on several issues. But after the COVID-19 pandemic, SDR, special drawing rights, have been allocated. And especially in Africa and Latin America, it has been used for fiscal resources. It has been used for health. It has been used for social protection. So there are other ways, and they need to be we need to further advocate for this kind of new initiatives. And all new, if we talk about wealth taxes and all new incomes that especially developed countries can have, they need to be already linked with climate, with gender. I mean, not for military expenditure or whatever. So we also need to tackle, if there will be new incomes in developed countries, they need to tackle these global urgencies to reduce inequalities. And well, I see that we are running out of time, but I would like to make a little bit of publicity, I can say. The Economic Justice Working Group of the C7, for the first time, have a specific positioning on debt, and it is a document that, and I want to thank all the members of this working group. We have a specific C7 position on debt, and I know we have copies printed. We will deliver them here or also by email, and this will be used to directly advocate to the G7, but also in other spaces. So I encourage you, if you want to use it, it's also welcome. And this year, besides the FFD4, which was the reason of this panel, there are several other campaigns like the Jubilee 2025, the Global Economic Justice Campaign, that you can join and keep working together collectively throughout the year. Thank you.
Ajit.
Okay. Kathy asked a specific question about the climate disinformation. So there are a number of initiatives, and I'm very happy to talk about it later. So there's a global initiative by UNESCO. There's also an initiative by the Boston University. Let's see whether they are going to continue to have money to do that. There's also Climate Action Against Disinformation, CAD, which is a group of 50 NGOs. So there are a number of initiatives. There's also something by European Union. My final points. So we talked a lot about fair share, and I totally agree. So the local civil society finds it challenging to talk about such big numbers, but that's exactly what we have to do. Unless we do that, we will not be able to communicate with public on what the fair share is, and that's what connects with the whole climate reparations ask. And I would request you, if you have not seen, you can go to the website equityreview.org, and we have been doing this fair share analysis as civil society for a very long time. Since 2015, you will find a number of reports. And in the UK, we have friends like Friends of the Earth, International War on Want, who have been communicating the real fair share action aid. So despite all the challenges. On Kim's point on how we really support civil society, I would say we need to really start looking at beyond ODA and reach out to people in the global north so that we can have solidarity between global north and global south, so that we can really get around this ODA system and talk about community support. Now there are, again, online initiatives of fundraising. We should actually connect and support those climate defenders directly. So individual donations, which also connects with the broader point on public narrative. So I would urge the northern civil society organizations in Canada and elsewhere to start interacting with their own public much more and talk about the real historical responsibility, reparations, and need for them to contribute and really go beyond. And I cannot emphasize enough, there's a huge opportunity now we have to talk about this narrative of 1% versus 99%. It's not even 1% now, it's like 0.1%. And Musk and Trump have given us such an amazing opportunity to be those poster boys of look at the kind of connivance we have had, and now it's so blatant, and we should talk about it more and more. So to me, there are huge opportunities. And speaking of debt, I'll just use two figures. You have Pakistani and Indian sitting here, and I can speak of South Asia talking about debt. UK, during its colonization in South Asia, took away money which is now worth $45 trillion. $45 trillion. And we talk about financial flows. The net financial flows from global south to global north, the number is $2 trillion annually. Right? So aid is actually a tiny part of it. So we need to look at the broader financial flows and trade and how the extraction is happening. That's what we need to talk about. So less aid gives us that opportunity to talk about those big numbers and structural issues. Thank you.
And in summarizing all we've heard, I think we all have an opportunity to stand with the billions and not with the billionaires. Please thank Chinelo, who is a Manu fan. Thank Harjit, who is an organic farmer. And thanks to Zia, the mathematician, and Patricia, the one who likes to play PlayStation. A round of applause for all my panelists.
Please, another round of applause for Oyebesi and all the panelists. I think that was really an excellent session, excellent insights, a lot of food for thought, and a lot of substantive inputs from the audience as well. So thank you so much for so actively engaging. Lots to definitely take away from the discussion. We are now at our first break of the day, so you're welcome to help yourselves to coffee, tea, and snacks, and we shall reconvene at 10:45. Thank you so much.